on this computer. Okay. Recording better be in progress. All right, here we go. Heart health. Oh boy. We talked about this yesterday a little bit with Carrie Tidwell, but I wanted to jump into this in a little bit more detail because it's such an important topic. And particularly, in the past few years with, a lot of people getting a certain thing and detoxing from a certain thing. And how can you regain or get some of that heart function back? There's a couple questions there. I'll start with the hard ones. Is as far as certain spike proteins and things of that nature, I have not found anything reliable that can actually do it. I know for sure there are people selling things that say they can do that. Certainly there are different things you can open your detoxification and drainage pathways on that can be helpful with that. I like zeolites. You could use chlorella. You could use a lot of different things as far as the heavy metal side of things, but the spike proteins themselves, I would remain skeptical of if that's something you can do. But that doesn't mean all hope is lost, because you can for sure do things to protect your heart. So this is not like, the end of the road and there's nothing you can do. That's certainly not the case. There's a lot you can do. And considering that even before this, heart disease, is the #1 killer worldwide, there's a lot that you can do to kind of help with it. Now, the heart is essentially, it supplies blood, right, to the rest of your body. And it does that with the help of the circulatory system. Those are your arteries and your veins. You have capillaries, lymphatic vessels kind of run along with them throughout your body. And we have to go through, all the different parts here. So this is where we're going to start sharing my screen, because I have a bunch of images. And again, if you're on Instagram, you want to join the Zoom room for True Health Thursday, feel free to hop on, because I share my screen. I'm going through some images, which I obviously cannot do on my phone, but I do them here. So, okay. So first thing we have to start with is the heart wall. Now, the heart wall, you'll see, has 3 layers. We have the endo, which is inside, the epi, which is outside, epicardium, endocardium. The middle layer is the myocardium. So when we're looking at it here, we have the myocardium, which you'll see is really the thickest part of this, right? That's the muscular part. We have the endocardium, which is kind of like the inner wall. And you'll see it's kind of like a different shape. We don't have that sort of like striated looking muscle, similar to like what you would see skeletal muscle to a degree. And then we have the epi, which is the outside, the epicardium, which is kind of the exterior. Now, beyond that, the heart has chambers. It's divided into 2 big chambers with one on each side of the heart. And then, we have a left and a right side. So really it's 4. So you'll notice we have a right atrium, a right ventricle. So this is where blood is going to come in. It's going to come in. It's going to get pumped through the right ventricle to the lungs. That's where oxygenation is going to happen. It's going to come back through the left atrium into the left ventricle. And then you have this hook shape. This is your aorta. And from there, the blood is distributed throughout the rest of your body. So we have it just so the order, we have right atrium, right ventricle, lungs, back to the heart, left atrium, left ventricle, aorta, and then to the rest of the body. So that is blood. And you'll see the blue here is going to be blood that needs to be oxygenated. And the red is oxygen-rich blood that needs to be dispersed out to the rest of the body. So that's essentially like what's going on here. Then we have heart valves. So I could kind of blow up this image a little bit here. I can make it a little bigger. So first, like there are different valves. You'll notice we have an atrioventricular valve, we have a tricuspid, and we have a mitral valve. You'll notice the tricuspid valve we have here. We have an aortic valve here, which opens up into that aorta. So if we go back up here, this would be your aortic valve. Then we have a bicuspid valve, or the mitral valve, that you'll see here. That's what enters the heart. So if we scroll back up, this would essentially be the mitral, This would be the aortic valve. This would be the tricuspid valve right here. So that's essentially where those things are located, and that essentially tells you like where things go. And then we have blood vessels. And your blood vessels are kind of are the distributors, right? These are the distributing factors. We have the arteries, and arteries essentially flow away from the heart, and veins flow to the heart. Now, why is that important? Because you actually have arteries that carry oxygen poor blood away from the heart. And again, if you want to see the pictures, you could join the Zoom room. It's a link in my bio for the True Health Thursday. You can check that out. You could join it on Zoom. That's where I'm sharing my pictures. So again, so you have things like the pulmonary artery, which goes away from the heart. It's an artery away to carry oxygen poor blood to the lungs to get oxygenated, and then those are brought back to the heart so it can go out through the aorta. Now you'll notice when we look at these, I kind of want to blow this up a little bit. When we're looking at arteries and veins, they're actually very similar in construction with two major differences. One you don't see in this picture, but the other you do. And that is arteries have a much thicker middle layer. Now, arteries and veins have three main layers similar to the heart. They call it the tunica intima, which is the internal kind of border of the artery and the veins. You have the tunica media, which is like a muscular kind of component that gives it its shape. And then you have a tunica adventitia, which is the external wall, so to speak, of arteries and veins. Now, one of the two biggest differences between arteries and veins is that arteries have a much thicker wall, a thicker media, I should say, a thicker tunica media. And the other thing, which is not pictured here, is veins actually have valves. So they have valves, so blood only flows in one direction. Now, you don't see that here in this picture, but they have flaps that valves that open one way. So you don't get a backflow of blood, again, away from the heart in veins. So those are some of the biggest differences that you're going to see, with hearts and veins. Now, and a lot of this also is breath controlled, which is really important. And this is why I'm such a big fan of breath work. It's because it's one of the only conscious mechanisms that control your autonomic nervous system that we have conscious control over. So these things can actually raise your blood. So if you're increasing your breathing, for example, that's going to increase your heart rate, increase your breathing, increase your blood pressure. Your blood vessels are going to constrict, particularly to the digestive tract. And it's also going to increase CO2 when that happens. The reason why you start breathing faster is because there is a CO2 buildup. CO2 is actually the primary marker that the body uses to initiate breathing. It's actually not a lack of oxygen concentration. It's an increase in CO2. And actually the secondary marker would be a change in blood pH. So oxygen actually alkalizes the blood. Carbon dioxide has a little bit more of an acidic component. So that's why you can use this to measure acid-alkaline balance in the body. You could change that literally through breathing. So that's another thing. As CO2 comes down, heart rate slows down, breathing slows down, blood pressure slows down. So there's a lot that can change, with how we breathe, oxygen levels in the body, acid-alkaline balance in the body, and CO2 levels in the body. And remember, CO2 is the primary indicator that the body uses to either ramp up breathing or slow it down. It is not oxygen concentration. So that's what we're working for. Now, the nervous system, like I mentioned, is also an important part of this as well. So we have what's called the phrenic nerve. I'll share my screen again here quickly. So the phrenic nerve is this nerve. It's kind of part of the trunk that comes off of the cervical nerve roots, and they come from C3, C4, C5. Whoops. And you can see this was actually something I learned in school. C3, C4, C5 keeps the diaphragm alive. So the phrenic nerve is made up of nerve roots that come off of C3, 4, and 5. They go down to the diaphragm to innervate it. Now, what we notice and what I see a lot in practice is a lot of folks will not necessarily breathe into their belly. They take short breaths into their chest. This does not activate the diaphragm as well as it should. This can lead to a variety of things. One very common one, actually, believe it or not, is hiatal hernias or minor ones, which you can kind of see through that. That's something very easily you could fix. For the most part, if it's a structural thing. But a lot of it is through breathing. So slowing down your breathing, nasally breathing, is going to be one way that we could already regulate heart health to a degree. And again, here's just like another image of blood flow when we're talking about heart and arteries and veins. And oh, here is actually a good picture. You can actually see the valves. So the valves only open this way, whereas arteries do not open at all. Maybe I could turn this. Yeah, I'll do it another time. So important to kind of keep that in mind. So that's it. Then we have to talk about the electrical system, actually, of the heart. And the electrical is system of the heart. Sorry, 1 second. That's upside down. Here we go. How to just fix the orientation. Is essentially how the heart pumps. Now, there's a sinoatrial node and an atrioventricular node. Or you might hear SA node and AV nodes. And it's essentially how electrical stimulations work in the body, how they're sent. And you could see that. I'll share my screen again. Here. So what happens is, again, we have the 4 chambers, and the rhythm is actually set by our natural pacemaker. Now, we all have a natural pacemaker, and that is the sinus node, the sinoatrial node. That is the initiator of the electrical contraction of the heart, or the electrical stimulation of the heart, which will tell the heart, hey, contract at this time. And you'll notice it starts up here, sinoatrial node, and gets spread downward to the ventricles and then to the left side of the heart. So the lub-dub, what you're hearing is certain valves that are opening and closing in the heart. And it started from the sinoatrial node, and this is actually what sets the pace. So every time it impulses, it will say, okay, start again. And it takes a little bit of time to get to here. It takes a little bit of time to get to here. And that's what's happening with the lub-dub. The first part's contracting, then the second part, because it takes time for that electrical signal to travel all the way through to initiate a contraction. Also, what that does is it allows, say, blood in this area to go into the ventricle. So if they contracted at the same time, blood flow would not be as efficient. If you could empty this to fill this up and then empty this, it's going to work a lot better. And that is how just genius our body is at a level, which is really cool. Now, we talked a little bit about blood and where things actually go. So mentioned the right side of the heart. This is unoxygenated or low oxygenated blood. That needs to get reoxygenated. And where that happens is in the alveoli. So if I blow this up, the alveoli are like these kind of like grape-like sacs at the end of the bronchioles in the lungs. They kind of look like these grape sacs. And this is where you get that exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So you have pulmonary arteries coming in that have oxygen, have basically blood with CO2 attached to it. That CO2 is given off. It's traded in for oxygen. Now the oxygenated blood goes back to the heart. It's going to come in the left side and then get distributed through the aorta. So that is essentially like what's happening. That's why the lungs and the heart are so intimately connected. And that's also why breathing, for example, is a really important part. Now, the blood itself actually has a lot of functions. One of which, the most obvious one that many of you are probably familiar with, is the supplying oxygen to tissues, but it also brings glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, immunological factors like white blood cells, repair mechanisms, platelets. All these things come from the blood. And again, we talked about this in the past, and I like bringing this up, is, we have the blood system, right? And then we have the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system actually is 80%. The interstitial fluid of the body accounts for roughly 80% of the fluid in the body, and the blood accounts for 20. The blood, the circulatory system, the heart, the lungs, all of this essentially functions as the body's kitchen. You take these nutrients, you take the oxygen, you take the glucose. This shuttles everything you need to the cells so that it can use oxygen, it can use glucose for energy, to create energy for the cells to do whatever they need to do. As things are utilized, they create waste, very similar to us. We eat food. We take what we can out of it. We take the glucose, we take the amino acids, we take the fatty acids, they are absorbed. And then the rest comes out through the kidneys, it comes out through the colon, it comes out through sweat. We excrete the stuff we don't need. Nature is fractal, so cells do this at a cellular level. Tissues do this at a tissue level. Organs do this. And all the organs work together to essentially mimic the functions of a single cell, just on a larger scale. So if we understand like what's happening at a cell level, which is take oxygen, take glucose, take nutrients, utilize them for the machinery to work, that creates waste products that they need to get rid of. That's what we're doing on the larger scale. So that is essentially like what blood is doing. Now, what's really cool, blood cells generally last anywhere between 90 and 120 days. And there's an intimate relationship with the kidneys and the bone marrow, which might not necessarily be something that, you might think initially, but it's really important. So what happens is, say we have low oxygen. So this would say happen if, I'm in New York, but say I go to Denver, right, Mile High City. I would initially struggle because I don't have enough oxygen in my body because it's a lower oxygen environment. So it takes a little bit of time to adapt. This is why athletes actually like to go to places like Denver to train, because it's a natural way to increase their oxygen capacity just by literally being in a lower oxygen environment. So what happens? The kidneys are going to say, hey, like we're not seeing the oxygen we need. They create a substance known as erythropoietin. What that does is it signals to the bone cells, to the bone marrow, I should say, hey, we need more red blood cells. That's going to increase, that's going to create the red blood cells. And as they go up, as we increase our red blood cell supply, that's going to shut off that function of the kidneys until there is another lack of oxygen. So, and that's how the system works. So the kidneys produce erythropoietin. That tells the bone marrow, hey, we need more red blood cells. We increase the production of red blood cells, and then we don't necessarily need the erythropoietin anymore. So the kidneys are like, hey, we don't need that. So that's essentially how that works, when we need oxygen. So the kidneys are very important. They're and the kidneys themselves are super important when it comes to heart health for this reason, and they're very sensitive to acidic environments. This is why things like meats, drugs, antibiotics, pain medicines, blood pressure medications, dairy, processed foods, coffee, all of these things are really sensitive, are going to tax the kidneys, because these are all going to add to that higher acidic load in the body. So it's really important that if you want to have kidneys that are functioning properly, and I will tell you, using things like iridology, a lot of people have kidney weakness, whether they realize it or not. And this could be something, if the kidneys do not filter as well as they should, it's going to be really tough to maintain healthy blood, especially long term. There are certain drugs that can target nephrons, which are the working parts of the kidney, the parts that do the filtering, if that makes any sense. These can be damaged by drugs like diuretics. So when we're talking again about blood pressure, Say I have 3 nephrons. One of them gets gummed up because it may be damaged due to, again, high acidic load, something like that. I still have 100% of blood that now has to go through 2 instead of 3 nephrons. What's that going to do? Increase blood pressure. So what is the response? Take a diuretic to lower blood pressure, but it doesn't fix the problem that we have damage to the kidneys. So you see, I hope you could see how this could be a little bit backwards in how we're looking at things. Then we have, and this is where like the pH part is so important. And this is why it's something that you can test, which is really cool. So if you want to test this at home, you need some litmus paper. You get some pH paper. You could, if you have a pool or something like that, or a fish tank, you probably already have this. Ideally your urine pH should be somewhere between 6 and 6.5. It should be slightly acidic. Why? Because you have to get rid of those byproducts in some form or fashion. So that's ideally like what you're looking for if you're doing it. It's just like a quick and dirty way to kind of go over that. So now that we have like a big idea of like all the major players when it comes to, heart disease, what are some of like the big things that go on? So let's start with like arrhythmias. Now, according to the Mayo Clinic, heart rhythm problems, which are an arrhythmia is a heart rhythm problem, essentially something wrong with the rhythm of the heart. It's when the electrical impulses that coordinate your heartbeats don't work properly, causing your heart to either beat too fast, too slow, or irregularly. So that's essentially what's going on with an arrhythmia. There's a lot of things that can cause that: stress, drug abuse, caffeine, alcohol, smoking, things going on with your thyroid, sleep apnea, nutrition or lack thereof, especially, particularly with things like certain B vitamins, CoQ10, we're going to cover this, magnesium, potassium, all of these things. If they're low, that is going to affect the electrical signals of the heart themselves. If the arteries are clogged or not as wide in diameter as they should be, that certainly can cause an arrhythmia. If there is scarring due to, say, like a prior heart attack, that is going to leave you more predisposed to a second one if you survive it. So essentially it's an ischemic attack. It's a lack of oxygen where the muscle doesn't work and it stops for a short period of time. So generally speaking, what they'll call normal is somewhere between 60 and I would say like 80 beats per minute. If you are in good shape, it can be lower than that. They would call that bradycardia, but I will tell you routinely, I have a heart rate that's in the 50s. I know people who do more endurance sports that can get it into like the low 50s, sometimes the high 40s. And that's just their resting heart rate because their heart is efficient. It does not have to beat as much because it is more efficient at getting blood to the rest of the body. So the faster your heart beats at rest, the more you're taxing your body on a regular basis and the less efficient the heart is. So we're going to talk about some ways that we can get that down. Now, stress can easily do it. Again, this is resting. Obviously, if I'm running wind sprints, it's going to be well over 120, 30. So, it's of course something that's going to change. But resting, like if we're in good cardiovascular respiratory health, you can get it closer to 60. And and like I said, you will see athletes routinely, like particularly endurance athletes, in the 60s and 50s regularly, sometimes in the 40s, and that is just normal due to their level of fitness. So it's not like it's slow, although that can be a case in certain cases if that's not the case, and this is where context is important. Now, just so you get like a visual of kind of what I'm talking about a little bit, I'll share my screen again here. Okay. So we have, this is what kind of like a normal heartbeat would look like. It would have this sort of spacing, and obviously the horizontal would be time here. Tachycardia would be a normal heartbeat. They would just be happening faster. Bradycardia is slower, so it's a normal heartbeat, but it's happening slower. And irregular, which is certainly not what you want, is that they're not consistent. So at least with tachycardia, at least with bradycardia, they're consistent heartbeats. In irregular heartbeats, they're not consistent. This would be an issue with the electrical part of the heart that we were talking about. This is why vitamin and mineral content, particularly minerals, are really important, because they are going to play a role in the electrical conductivity of the heart. Things like calcium, magnesium, all these things are really important for that. So that's another thing. So like with arrhythmias, like generally speaking, there are a few different treatments that the conventional folks would go with. You could go with medications, you can go with cardioversion, which is kind of like, we'll get to it, catheter ablation, pacemakers, or an implantable defibrillator, which is certainly extreme. Now, as far as the medications, generally speaking, there are 5 main types. You'll have your calcium channel blockers, you'll have your beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, diuretics, cholesterol drugs, to help with this, or at least that's the intent. Now, there's been problems with each of these. I kind of have some studies with each of them, but essentially, like all of them, ironically, for the things that they're supposed to fix, calcium channel blockers, etc., actually could increase heart failure over time. Now, a lot of these calcium channel blockers have a tendency to deplete calcium in the body. Beta blockers and ACE inhibitors are well known to do the same thing, along with magnesium and CoQ10. These are things that you need for the heart to function properly. Diuretics certainly do the same thing, especially with potassium, B vitamins. So taking them long-term really causes some issues. There's the multiple risk factor trial study. So this is one, just a quote from it. In point of fact, a subset of hypertensive treated with diuretics had the highest mortality rate, probably from ventricular fibrillation due to potassium depletion. So they're telling you outright, hey, chances are, like, you might be hypertensive, you might have arrhythmia because there is something going on with sodium potassium imbalance, which is really important just for electrical conductivity in general in the body. So let's give you something that can potentially spare you more potassium. So ironically, a lot of these things that they're supposed to fix, like, end up depleting the nutrients that you need that are going to fix the problem. There's a study out of Alabama, University of Alabama, 2015, quote here. Scientists found the risk of stroke went up by 1/3 for each blood pressure medication taken. People who needed 3 or more medications were at a 248% higher risk than those whose normal blood pressure was less than 120 millimeters mercury. I'll rephrase that. If you are taking 3 blood pressure medications, your risk of stroke goes up 250%. That is wild. That risk is similar to people whose blood pressure is high but are not taking any drugs to control it. So in other words, you can take the drugs to lower your blood pressure into what we call normal, or you could take no drugs at all and have the same risk, basically the same risk of stroke. Here's another quote. You are in as much trouble by the time you are on 3 medications to achieve excellent control as you are when you have hypertension that is untreated, which is amazing. We want to raise the issue that despite great advances in the pharmaceutical approach, relying solely on this approach is going to come at the dear price of people's lives. That's the author of the study. That's not me. And again, this is from Alabama, University of Alabama, 2015, on blood pressure medications and increased stroke. Then we have cardioversions, which they're very similar to a defibrillator, but they're not. Defibrillation would happen when the heart stops. It's an emergency situation, so your heart has stopped. This is not what happens with a cardioversion. It's a similar process, but it's not done to the same degree. Like, you're not using as powerful of an electric input with cardioversion. This is something you could plan at the hospital. This is not an emergency procedure. But what can happen, there are some risks that come along with this. So, you know, things like blood clots, dislodging blood clots, abnormal heart rhythm can certainly go this. These are things that can cause, you know, real problems with this. So that becomes an issue. Cardioablation. So this is actually where it's a procedure done where you try to break down or take out scar tissue in the heart that is kind of messing with the electrical signals in the heart. Essentially, they take diagnostic catheters and they thread them through blood vessels, and they use that to map out your heart's electrical signals, essentially, to try to figure out what's going on. Now, there are risks that come along with this too. There could be bleeding. There could be damage to blood vessels. You could puncture the heart. You could damage your heart's electrical system, which could ironically make the arrhythmia worse. And that might require a pacemaker, which we're going to get to in a second. It could potentially lead to something like blood clots. It could narrow the veins. It could damage the kidneys from the dye used during the procedure, because that's something else that the kidneys are going to have to go through. So, you know, it really becomes an issue. There's a study from 2002 that showed that 2% of the people who actually went through a catheter ablation actually died, or their death could be likely attributed to the procedure itself. So that's 1 in 50, essentially. You know, want to know the risks, of course. Pacemakers. Now, I think everyone knows what a pacemaker is. Essentially, it's something that you put in the body that is supposed to take over what that sinoatrial node is supposed to do. Now, listen, these can be life-saving, of course, in certain situations, but that doesn't mean that they, you know, don't come with risks. Like, there certainly is a risk of infection. You know, there could be an allergic reaction used to the dye, you know, during or anesthesia. There could be bruising or swelling or bleeding. It could damage the blood vessels and nerves near the pacemaker. Like, during the procedure, it could lead to a collapsed lung. You know, pacemakers have been known potentially to, you know, malfunction. And if they malfunction, that's unfortunately going to lead to, you know, a mortality issue, a death. There was actually something that came out a few years ago in the Daily Mail, of all places, that they looked at roughly 14,000 patients die in the UK each year having been fitted with a pacemaker, of whom half die suddenly after having been in relatively good health. So it could add up. You know, there's certainly like a lot that's going on there. So, you know, these are not necessarily things like we might see them as like, oh, these are just things that happen. Like, we want to avoid these as much as possible. Like, if we're playing with the electrical signal of the heart, you know, that there is a chance that this foreign entity like might not work forever. And if it just randomly malfunctions one day, that could ultimately, unfortunately, like mean the end of your life. There's actually someone I know personally who that happened to, and he was in his 30s. So, you know, it is really sad. You know, ended up, you know, lived alone, and ultimately was found in his apartment a few days later after it just stopped. No one knew. He was supposed to go to work on a trip, missed his flight. The company reached out, couldn't catch him. Eventually reached out to the family, and ultimately they that's what they found. So, you know, it's really sad, but, you know, this is what happens. This could potentially, these are the risks, like, if you go that route. And the goal, why I say all this, I don't mean to really bring this down, but it's really important to understand, like, sure, these things can save your life if you absolutely need it in an emergency situation, but it doesn't ever need to get to that point. It really doesn't. Like, you know, you can certainly help and get to and have a healthy heart, where you don't have to deal with arrhythmias, where you don't have to deal with sudden cardiac arrest. And we're seeing what's happening now with younger people, this becoming a bigger thing. I mean, this is happening at a much greater rate than it did in the past, particularly with we're seeing it with people who are athletes. Like these are not normal things that happen. And you could look up the rates. Like this is not something normal. So when we're talking about keeping healthy blood, keeping a healthy heart, let's go over the basics before getting into the specifics. And I want to start that, like, before we get into the specifics, if you're consuming processed garbage, if you're living a sedentary lifestyle, if you're smoking, if you're overweight, if you have insulin sensitivity challenges, if you don't sleep well, you're not getting 7 hours of sleep at least a night, that's step one. You cannot replace any of that. So those are going to play primary roles in all of this. So if you're not getting the sleep, if you're not nasally breathing, if you're smoking, if you're overweight, if you're not exercising on a daily basis, that has to be step one if you don't want to go down this path. And it's likely because, again, the number one cause of death. So start there. Now, as far as the nutrition aspect, it is essential that, like, we don't raise the inflammation levels in the body. So what is that going to include? That's going to be no refined sugar. We really want to cut out, the animal products as much as we can, especially when we're talking about heart health. That's animal proteins, that's meat, that's fish, that's eggs, that's dairy products, as much as possible. That's going to go a long way. Obviously, no processed foods, no GMOs, no white flour. We don't want toxic fats. We don't want canola oil. We don't want the seed oils. These play a huge role in the issues with heart disease in general. Like, the focus has to be fresh, organic fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. That is, you're talking about cleaning your arteries, cleaning up your heart. That's the start. Now, as far as specifics, we have to jump into this a little bit. We got to talk a little bit about methylation. Now, methylation is, I call it the light switch mechanism of the body. Essentially, it's a trading of, so none of the animal-based diets that are popular. Listen, this is a story for another day, and I could go into it in a much more detail. But I find it incredible how so many folks can be aware of what's going on with certain things in the health space and have this completely overblown, and just miss this completely. Like, when you look at all of the larger studies, and I'm talking big ones, population-wide ones, the best health outcomes are going to be largely plant-focused. Just what it is. And that's the best, unfortunately, in my opinion, information we have on nutrition, because when you start getting into the specifics of, like, what does this one molecule do, we don't even know all the players at the table when it comes to nutrition. I'm not even going to try to beat around the bush on that, because we don't. So to assume, something is high in nutrient X, so you should eat nutrient X or eat this specific food, that is a very, very reductionistic way to look at nutrition. And it's not, it just doesn't, it doesn't show up when you actually look around. Because guess what? Most of the diets that most Americans eat are going to be more animal-based already. It's burgers, it's fries, it's eggs. Like, this is what, bacon and eggs and toast. Like, that is your standard American breakfast. I'm not going down that path today. I want to stay on track. Methylation, yes, light switch system, essentially, of the body. They turn things on and off in the body. That is what the methylation cycle does. It can get much more confusing than that. I have some diagrams here if you want to take a look. This is actually a simplified one. It literally says that if you want to take a look. A simplified version of methylation, the simplified methylation pathway. This is the simple version. But essentially what's happening, big picture, is it's turning certain things on and off, and you need certain things to do that. You need B12, you need methionine, you need B9, folate. So you see the folate cycle. You need things like riboflavin. You need things like thiamine, niacin. All of these things you need. So this is where B vitamins become very important. They're going to play a big role. So one of the things could be a rising in homocysteine. This is going to happen when you can't cycle through methionine effectively in this methylation cycle. Usually you're going to need B9, which is folate, or B12 to do this. If either one of those are low, then you might get a buildup in homocysteine. So that would be you know, kind of where you would start from there. So, you know, again, is the answer mean you supplement with B9 or you supplement with B12? Well, not necessarily. You know, B9 essentially can be found, if you look at the name folate, it comes from foliage plants, which is what most people aren't consuming anyway. You know, dark leafy greens, broccoli, asparagus, nuts, avocados, seeds, bananas, mushrooms. I mean, all of these are going to be good sources. So as far as B9, B12 is a little bit trickier. And I'm going to do a separate talk on this, because actually what we're finding now, because the soil is so depleted, like actually in people who eat animal products, they're actually becoming B12 deficient. And it's not because the animals create their own B12. They don't. It's because microbes do, bacteria do. And in a healthy gut, which there are very few, if any, in my opinion, in America, you actually have microbes that create it inside of you. You actually do. There are certain strands of bacteria that do it. Now, everyone conveniently glosses over this fact or think you can't absorb it or some ridiculous thing. But the truth is, because you're poisoning, most people are poisoning themselves on a regular basis with things like glyphosate and antibiotics and antacids and PPIs and birth control and glyphosate and non-native EMFs and all of these things. They're going to disrupt that flora, and you're not going to be able to get the most you need out of it. So again, can a B12 supplement potentially be helpful for certain people at a certain time? Yes. I would much rather you try algae. I would much rather you try spirulina, chlorella. But the real answer is fix your gut, which is what it is. And most people, especially in America, they're just falling apart. And science, unfortunately, is going to be 30 years behind on this and probably not even figure this out in my career potentially, but hopefully we'll get there. We'll see. Other things that are important, B2 is also important. So you can find that leafy vegetables, beans, mushrooms, almonds, rice, avocados, sunflower seeds, Brussels sprouts. I mean, there's a ton. Like, it's really just a variety. Like, you really do not have to overthink this. B1, beans, seeds, brown rice, lentils, potatoes, oranges, green leafy vegetables, nuts, peas. Like, you could find all of this here. So, you know, that is going to be something that's really important. Glycine is really important. It's an important player in the methylation cycle as well. Glycine is a certain amino acid. You can use it it's needed for healthy digestion, for stress, nervous system, developing the musculoskeletal system, stabilizing blood sugar, glutathione synthesis, your master antioxidant, stress, anxiety, red blood cells, repairing joints and cartilage, promoting restful sleep. Some people will take glycine for sleep. Yeah, that would be a big thing. If you're looking for, in my opinion, better sources, beans, spinach, cauliflower, kale, your cruciferous vegetables, pumpkin, certain fruits, actually, like bananas and kiwis will actually have it. So those are all good ones. Then we have to talk about histamine. Now, not that you have to consume it. You're never going to get something that's going to be completely free of histamine per se. But what you are going to get is ways to lower it. Now, histamine is actually something you need. It's something you'll find in mast cells, which are the same thing as basophils. They kind of release histamine. And that's how you get like a reaction that you need, a chemical message that you need to start an inflammatory reaction in a proper way. So you actually need histamine. Unfortunately, they're a little bit, it becomes an issue with a lot of folks, particularly when there are GI challenges. So when we're talking about things like gluten sensitivity, when we're talking about things like leaky gut, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, IBS, SIBO, bacterial overgrowth, these can all lead to what people are now calling mast cell activation syndrome, which is, again, it's a gut issue for the most part. Fix the gut, a lot of this stuff starts to go away. So we like coming up with fancy names for new things, but they're all they lead back to the same thing. This is, again, why I like doing iridology. When you look at a chart, the gut is at the center. To me, it makes a lot of sense. So, that's a part of it. So what are some other things you can do to help lower that? Vitamin C. Vitamin C rich foods, it's literally all fruits and vegetables are going to have vitamin C, particularly if they're raw. But particularly notable ones, citrus fruits, berries, papayas, mangoes, persimmons, guava, apples, peppers of all kind. Peppers actually probably have the most, and I always leave them out. Cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, sprouts, all great. Pine needle tea has become a popular thing, especially in the last couple of years. One of the reasons is because it's very high in vitamin C, has antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal properties. I would say if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, pine needle tea would be one of the things I would probably hold off on. Like a lot of antifungal type of herbs, I would not reach for pine needle tea if you're nursing or if you're pregnant. Now, glutathione is the master antioxidant. I'm sure you've probably heard of. Really helpful for mitigating free radical damage in the body. Antioxidants are going to be really helpful here as well as far as supporting that. So vitamins A, C, and E, selenium, manganese, magnesium, quercetin, lycopene, lutein, these are all going to be really helpful, especially, and they're going to be used and help with glutathione production and utilization of the body. Vitamin D, most people are vitamin D deficient. Even in the summer, it's gray today, but even if it's gray, get outside. Ideal levels of vitamin D, somewhere between 50 and 80 nanograms per milliliter. Most people I see are below 30. I believe the normal ranges will say 30 is normal. It's not. I really don't like supplementing with vitamin D because what I'm finding is it inhibits your own ability to make it. And this is really true for all hormones, and vitamin D is a hormone. So it's a misnomer that will probably never be fixed, but here we are. What I find is if you supplement your body with hormones, in this case, vitamin D, your body will not make it or be as efficient as making it. This is why I will never be a fan of something like TRT or HRT in general. The exception to that, the only exception to that, is if you're cutting glands out of your body, which ideally you shouldn't be. So if you've had, a hysterectomy or had your thyroid removed, in that case, yeah, you would probably need to take hormones. Well, no, you will need to take hormones the rest of your life. But these things are done usually a lot more flippantly than, in my opinion, they should be. We don't have glands that malfunction. We need to figure out why they're malfunctioning, and usually they're not malfunctioning at all. They're trying to make up for the damage we're putting on ourselves. So we need to get realistic with that and take that responsibility if we really want to make a difference. Vitamin K, really important for blood clot formation, healthy bone matrix. Also helpful with calcium metabolism in the body, which is really important when we're talking about heart health as well. Greens, carrots, tomatoes, alfalfa, green leafy vegetables, cabbage, all great sources of vitamin K. Everyone's like, oh, well, if you don't eat animal products or fermented foods, you can't get K2. Like B12, your gut should actually make it. Yes, you can make it on your own. Omega-3/6 balance. So this is a big one. A lot of Americans are 20 to 40 times, have 20 to 40 times more omega-6s than 3s. The ideal ratio is 1 to 1. Usually when you cut out the seed oils, when you cut out the garbage, you get a lot closer to that. So that becomes a big one. Zinc, just in general, really important for the immune system, cell growth, wound healing, really helpful actually to transfer carbon dioxide from the tissue to the lung. So it actually helps offload carbon dioxide, which is important when we're talking about heart health too. Chickpeas, lentils, seeds of all kind, quinoa, nuts like cashews and walnuts, kidney beans, seaweeds, all good sources of zinc. Magnesium, probably the most common mineral deficiency in the body. All fruits, vegetables, dark leafy greens, seaweeds, nuts, seeds. Man, I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot. But you also notice this is probably what not a lot of people are consuming. Outside of food, body composition is big. This is why, part of the reason why I'm big on exercise, and this will not change because you cannot recreate it. The truth is that if you're a man, if you're a male, and you have body fat over 17%, or you're a woman and you have 20% body fat or over, the fact of the matter is, like, your chances of heart disease begin to increase once you go over those thresholds. So if you think that's low, it's time to start taking this stuff more seriously. I really just say this out of love because I don't do this from like an aesthetic standpoint is all. Truth is, like, and I talked about this last night with Joe and Brad and Danny, like, you know, there's so many benefits of exercise that have nothing to do with physique. And honestly, like, that's the least important part, in my opinion. It's non-negotiable. If you want healthy heart, you have to do it. And particularly, like, you're going to do something at max effort, whether it's strength training, and you don't have to 1 rep max every time, or something at a high level, sprints, swimming, you know, something that's going to get you moving at a high pace. Obviously within reason. If you're injured, obviously you want to work your way out of that. You don't want to do things injured, but have to do strength training, have to do these things that are going to push you. So, you know, yes, is it going to be uncomfortable? It sucks. But you know what? If I'm not doing, you know, my wind sprints at least once a week, I know it's going to be a lot harder on my body in the future if I don't take care of that now. And I would much rather do that. Grounding. Grounding is really cool because we actually take up free electrons from the earth. We can actually offload and find that balance, regulate that internal electric circuitry in the body. We do that by just connecting with nature. And if you think about it, like, how freaking cool is that you can just connect your body with nature, and it can potentially help normalize your electrical inputs that your body has. It's wild. Like, the answers are so simple. They might not necessarily be easy, but they are simple, and they're there. Garlic. Garlic, I love. One of the best, in my opinion, like, antimicrobial type of things that I use. Pretty much anyone can use garlic. You can eat it, but great for heart health. Pomegranate, rosemary, royal jelly, believe it or not. So that's actually like the type of honey that is given to the queen bees. That's fantastic. Other herbs: hawthorn, butcher's broom, motherwort, horse chestnut, algae, ginger, bilberry, ginkgo, star anise, slippery elm. Oof. Meditation. What else did I miss? Meditation, certainly one. Breath work. Like I said, like, check out the Breathe Easy course. I mean, there's tons. There's a lot there. Like, what I would say, there's a stack that I like, and if you want to message me after this, I could send it to you. That I like using Biomedic. I like using this product called Heart Aid, and this one called Zinc Aid, which is actually like a food source of zinc in an herbal form. And Biomedic, which is my favorite for helping detox the gut, especially from things like glyphosate. That's a stack I like. And I think it would be helpful getting things kick-started, but you have to do the lifestyle stuff too. And, you know, all this stuff is there for the taking. So, you know, I do have a couple Iris consults that are opening up this month. If you want to message me about it and work with me and get a plan on so that you can get started, just reach out. You can check the link in my bio or reach out to me. You could just message me, Iris, or something like that, and I could send you the link. Yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. I'll put this up on YouTube. It's been a pleasure. I'll see you guys next time.